We're very pleased to have all of you here for the Global Environmental Careers Panel. This is part of a larger University of Michigan International Career Pathways series, so hopefully some of you have been able to attend some of the other events. We've also incorporated this event into SNRE's Career Week that we've been having all week as well. A couple of notes. We are recording the presentation and that will be available later. We'll send the link around. But we are actively recording the session. A couple other notes. I wanted to thank the event is sponsored by the School of Natural Resources and Environment and many of the other U of M Career Center offices that we work with for International Career Pathways, and especially also the International Institute, which provided some of the funding to help our speakers come. And then also International Center, we want to thank Bill Nolting in the back. He's been very instrumental in helping work with students interested in international opportunities. On that note, one quick plug, we have SNRE has a unique program. I know that there may be some students interested in international opportunities. SNRE has a unique Master's International program for those people who may have an interest in working, going to Peace Corps for a couple of years abroad. So this is a pretty new program. We have one student currently, Brian Smizer. He's not here today, but he works in the Peace Corps office, and he can talk to you about the program. Basically, I think students apply, and then you would spend a year taking courses, and then you would go for your 2-year Peace Corps service, and then return. And that's sort of like the equivalent of your master's project, which is kind of a unique program. So, and we have some handouts on that. I'd like to quickly introduce our panelists today. So the format for today will be, we will have the panelists, well, I'll ask a series of questions. You guys will have an opportunity to ask your questions as well. The recording will stop at about 12:30. So from 12:30 to 1 o'clock we're going to have a more informal session where you'll have a chance to come down and chat with panelists, one-on-one or in small groups, however you'd like to do that. So if you had more personal questions, you can ask that. I would just ask that you note that the panelists are here today, not necessarily representing their companies, but they're here to share their experiences, some based, of course, on the work that they've done with their companies, but they're here to really share their experiences with you and are not necessarily, representing their companies. So our first panelist, we have Brieland Jones, one of our very own students. He's a dual MSc student in SNRE and engineering, environmental engineering focused on sustainable systems. He conducted his master's thesis on the social and environmental impacts of charcoal production in Liberia, where he was able to connect with a number of aid organizations, including USAID and the United Nations Development Program. He did an internship with them in Liberia. I guess the U of M has a special subcontract. They're a subcontractor for a 5-year education program in Liberia focused on capacity building in engineering and agricultural disciplines called Excellence in Higher Education for Liberian Development. And for the past 2 years, Brieland has been very much involved in that group with other U of M graduate students. They've designed, delivered innovative hands-on curriculum to university students while engaging with multiple stakeholders and managing logistics in this developing country. So he'll have some great experiences to share. Next to him, we have Amy Braun. She has both an undergraduate degree from University of Michigan in the program in the environment. I know we have some Pike students here. Also an MS in environmental policy and planning from SNRE, also from University of Michigan. She's the sustainability manager at Kellog Company, a $14 billion global leader in cereals and snacks. Her job includes a lot of work in embedding and reinforcing sustainability commitments in Kellogg's supply chain for their ingredients, packaging, and services. She also supports environmental health and safety team to engage Kellogg's employees they have 65 global manufacturing plants to improve practices to reduce local impacts and assess risk. So some of her projects are as local as here in Michigan, Frankenmuth, Michigan, some of her sustainability work, and as far away as Cote d'Ivoire and Bolivia. So she gets to do a tremendous amount, both locally and globally. Last but not least, we have Chris Nordstrom. He is a Master of Landscape Architecture alum from the School of Natural Resources and Environment. He's currently based out of Chicago, but formerly with a Norwegian design firm, landscape architecture design firm called Tang Tre, the Trondheim, Norway. He's practiced both independently in Ann Arbor and also with this firm in Norway, and so he has a lot of tremendous experience to share for students that are interested in working abroad. His projects have included municipal, institutional, commercial projects, including several school designs, large-scale residential projects, and a redesign of several rail stations near Oslo to incorporate universal access standards. So, I'd like to start off by asking each of the panelists to quickly, I know I've introduced each of you, but if you could say a little bit more about the organizations that you've worked with, your background, and kind of what led you to your current roles.
So my internship, I guess you'd call it, is more of, we talked about this earlier, we kind of figured it was more of a consulting job. Basically, my involvement with it came from my involvement with a student organization here in the School of Natural Resources called Sustainability Without Borders. And so it's a organization that started with work in Liberia, and so I got involved with that, and through networking in that group, I was asked to be a part of this team of graduate students to go over to Liberia, work here for the first half of the year in developing a curriculum that's based on engineering and agricultural principles, and then go to Liberia and actually implement it. So we taught 80 university students and 80 high school students. And so basically coming into SNRA, I wanted to do something international that focused on community development, and that was the perfect track for me to take. And just being involved in that organization really led to these doors opening for these types of opportunities. So yeah, I plan to continue working with this. Next summer I'm hoping to get more of a career technical focus internship, but I think there's really good opportunities for it to mix together well, so yeah.
Hello everyone. So Lisa did a really good overview. So I work for Kellogg. You guys know Kellogg cereals. We also are more than just cereals. So we have, well, there's good ones like the Pop-Tarts and stuff like that, but we also own other brands. So Keebler, so all the cookies and crackers. We own Cheez-Its, yummy. And we also own Kashi and Morningstar and Garden Burger. So we kind of run the gamut on those kind of products. So my job really kind of consists of 3 different areas, and all of them have kind of synergizes well into all of my past experiences. So one of the areas of focus that I do is within our own plants and supporting the sustainability efforts in comparison to environmental science, and those things are slightly different. So that interaction, I actually, after my undergrad and before grad school here at Michigan, I worked for the University of Michigan at Waste Management Services doing a recycling initiative. So if you still see those 25-year commemorative stickers on the side of the recycling bins, that was me. So that's part of what I do, employee engagement, communication on that. Another is responsible sourcing in our supply chain. So we're a global company. We source globally. A lot of the things that we put in our products are where we get them is where we sell them. So for our grains, U.S. grains are being consumed in the U.S., but cocoa is only grown so many places. So we have a pretty global footprint based on where we sell our products and where we source our products. So we want to make sure that it's both sustainable and sustainable agriculture, which is one piece of that, and then also responsible in terms of the ethics and social side, which is kind of a new area for me personally. Before this, I was at USDA, and so the sustainable agriculture piece kind of fits into that. So that's that's my story of how we got to this point.
Good morning. Unlike the other two panelists, I don't know that I can say that my job was necessarily something with a global reach that was typical of what we do here as a landscape architect. What was kind of interesting for me in particular was that as a good snerd, I wanted to try to bring some more sustainability and ecological design into the company that I worked for in Norway. So I helped to form an Energy and the Environment Committee. I got to go to the World Green Roof Conference in Copenhagen, and basically introduce some technologies that for a lot of you here are mundane, but for there it was actually surprisingly innovative. It was a really great experience to get to see where we stand on ecological issues in the U.S. versus where they are in some of the places in Europe, and I realized very quickly that it's vastly different from country to country. So hopefully, I think my experience for today, and hopefully this will be of use to you at some point, is just to give you an idea of how to get started in this and what you can expect when you, well, I can't tell you what to expect, but give you an idea of what you might want to anticipate thinking about as you look at new positions overseas.
Okay. Great. Now if you could talk a little bit more in depth about projects that you've worked on, either globally focused projects, maybe pick one or two projects and give a little bit more detail for students in terms of what, what you worked on, or for Chris working abroad, talk about a project or two that you worked on. And I guess you did say that they're similar to what you would be doing in the U.S., so I don't know if there are any differences that you found working abroad on those projects. What skills are you drawing on most, and any advice that you have on how they might gain these skills now to prepare them for some of these global or experiences abroad? Whoever wants to start.
I've got the mic, so I'm going to talk for now. I think the one project I can think of that would be kind of typical of what I did there was work, as Lisa already mentioned, I was working on universal access standards for some rail stations in Oslo. And really all that's saying is it's sort of like the ADA standards here. They had a bunch of old trains. I mean, as you can imagine, their transportation network was pretty remarkable. But they're also very old. And so they had these trains that you would have to step up 2 or 3 steps to get onto the train. And obviously for people that have any kind of physical challenges, that was a problem. So we went through and completely redesigned, I think we did 6 stations on one line. And it was getting down to the millimeter on where the platforms had to be. What it taught me, and the reason I'm bringing this one up is because even though it was different, we're talking universal access versus ADA, a lot of it was very much the same. What it taught me is you need to understand regulations wherever you are. And that's something that you can only get when you're there, because it's amazing. If you think you run into a lot of regulations and projects around here, you have no idea what it's like when you start doing it overseas. And the real challenge is that when you're reading these regulations, and you're reading something in your first language may be, that's one thing. But when you're trying to translate something in your head, as you're going through and reading something that's brand new to you, it can be really, really challenging. So what that gets me thinking when Lisa asks, what kind of skills do you need when you start going overseas? We talked about this a little bit before we came out here. I think my absolute number one recommendation to you is, if you have an idea of the country you want to work in and you know what the language is, start learning it now. Immersion is great. You'll learn a lot that way. But if you have at least the fundamentals under your belt, when you get there, it's going to go a long way to making your life a lot more pleasant for the first few months. I had no idea I was going to end up in Norway. I had never even thought about Norway. As it was, one of our graduates had emailed our class and said, hey, we've got this position. If you want an adventure, come on out to Trondheim, Norway. I didn't know what Trondheim, Norway was. But it just happened that the day that email came out, I got a rejection from one of the architectural firms I had applied to here. So I went to my wife and said, hey, want to go to Norway? Ha, ha, ha. Yeah. 2 weeks go by. another rejection comes in. And I said, all right. And the next thing I know, I'm on the phone with him, talking, actually, I think we used Skype for that. We ended up talking for 2 hours on the phone. And I'm flying to Trondheim, have an interview there with a woman who was, she's from Thailand, but lived in Norway for 20 years, and English was her third language. And she's interviewing me, and it was kind of, I think I know what you said, I'm not sure. But then I decided, well, I'm going to show it off, because I downloaded a program, and I'm going to try working. Kind of gave me this blank stare, and then smiled, and then she, I love America, and then went on. So it's really something that, especially as you're coming, I don't want to hog this too much longer, and I'll kind of wrap up here quickly. But starting a new career, you've got a lot of things you don't know until you get out there. And with languages, I don't care if you go through every CDN, Rosetta Stone, or whatever else, you haven't learned name. And that's what everybody uses. So if you can use Rosetta Stone, get yourself started. Better yet, go into one of these immersion programs, like for Norwegian, if you want to go to Norway, they have camps in Minnesota you can go to. And you spend a month there, and you speak nothing but Norwegian while you're there. Do things like that. You know, just think about where you want to go and be prepared before you go.
Let me just jump in real quick. You mentioned the language immersion. I understand there are FLAS fellowships, I think they're called. I've seen them circulated around, but they're opportunities to get funding to go and learn the language. So I would look into some of those, and I'm sure there's tons of other resources.
So I'm going to stay on the theme of communication. That's probably going to get really old, just so you know, because I'm probably going to hit it a few more times. One of the biggest points, no matter what part of my job it is communication. It's essential to any environmental program. I'm sure you understand that. But especially when it is for folks outside of the U.S., it is especially important to communicate what your goals are and understand and listen to what their goals are. My projects often, most exciting projects I have are about the supply chain. So all of our products are food products. They all come from the ground at some point. That's normally where most of our impacts are, both environmentally and socially. I'm sure you guys knew that. So when we're trying to target how do we really affect change, how are we good citizens, it often doesn't really have to do with what we're in control of, it's what we can influence in our supply chain. So one of the projects that we are working on right now is that we have quinoa in our products. So quinoa, if you're not familiar, heritage pseudo grain, only grown in the Indian region. Currently, our supply chain involves llamas, who are the ones that are tilling the ground and fertilizing the ground for growers in Bolivia. So one of the ways was knowing that there's a lot of interest in quinoa, knowing that we have what it would be relatively a large volume compared to an individual buyer, but small in terms of our overall product line. How do we engage with Bolivian farmers who have less than an acre, that have llamas, that don't have tractors? Where do we find insertion points, and how do we get to them? So the most important way is to talk to our supplier, because we don't directly grow. We don't directly deal with the farmers. We always have somebody that's helping facilitate that, and that's our supplier. So we researched our supplier a lot before we got into business with them, and we knew he was a really great guy and did all these programs around social work with them already, around he supports the dentistry for these farmers, because that on average 8 cavities per farmer, and some of them had to be replaced. So he saw the need, he filled that need, and we're like, okay, this is a guy that wants to work with us on this kind of stuff. So by understanding that, understanding his goals, we were able to make a smart partnership. And then we asked the growers, what do you need help with? So what they came back to us with is that they don't really have a global vision of how quinoa is changing. We know, because we're starting to eat it, that quinoa is changing, but they know that their prices are going up, but they don't really have any input to how is that driving. So what we did was we funded, I believe, 8 Bolivian farmers, and we sponsored an agronomist to help support them as they start to develop their farms, and had them come to Washington State for the International Quinoa Research Symposium. And so that was a really fun adventure. I got to go there to Washington, not Bolivia, sorry, and meet all of them, communicate through a translator, and hear their point of view. And really, the communication is so important. If we didn't ask them what was important and we told them what was important, we wouldn't get the traction we have. If they weren't there, they weren't able to communicate to the larger research community, who, for the most part, that's who it was. They're all PhDs and researchers, saying that their point of view is when you dissect the quinoa into yields, you're losing the connection to Mother Earth. And you can't take away quinoa without thinking about the llamas. So that was their point of view, which was really important because there's no indigenous voice. So when you're starting to look into these communities, knowing your stakeholders, knowing how to communicate, which is something we all struggle with every day. How do you communicate? How do you get your point across and your goals without putting other ones aside? But keeping that at the heart of any project that you're doing, whether it be domestic or international, I think it's really important.
So kind of piggybacking off of that, communication is key. And I'll talk a little bit more about a different aspect of that. So the biggest part of my internship was to develop a curriculum and then implement that the following year, the following semester. And so the previous year I was a part of it as well, and most of the implementers were engineers. And so the curriculum was focused on engineering and agriculture, and the leads on the project figured, oh, engineering people must know how to best develop engineering curriculum. And so, naturally coming into it, I was like, okay, that makes sense. But we get there, and there's all engineers sitting around the table, and we're kind of stuck. We don't know where to go from here because none of us have really done curriculum before. We've taught, but we don't have that strategic methodology of how do you create a curriculum, what's the best impact you can do with a curriculum. So the first year was great. We overcome those challenges and we did fine. This past year I was put in charge of the program, of forming a team and creating just further successes with the program. And so that kind of came back to me in thinking about, even though we're doing an engineering curriculum, it's not the best way to do it by just having engineers at the table. Sustainability is all about interdisciplinarity, and so if you're a part of SNRE, you already know that. They hammer it into us like anything. In any class you hear that. And so all of our class projects, they always group us together with different, we have business with policy, with engineering, with social justice people, with everything, right? And so that is key, and so I can't stress that enough. This past year we had engineers working with education people, which naturally makes sense. We had environmental justice, we had SNRE, so we had a very broad swath of disciplines, and so that just made the project or the curriculum that much stronger, and it made the team cohesion that much stronger as well. And so I can't stress teamwork enough. I think when any discipline you go in, any job you go into, you're going to be working with different people that are not from your discipline. And so as much as it may seem like you want to stick in your comfort zone and just work with the people that know what you know, it'll definitely help you in the long run to start branching out and getting out of your comfort zone, going to events. Learning these skills it doesn't just come naturally, you have to practice them, right? So going to events, networking. I know there's a lot of fear of the classical networking, just putting yourself out there, but networking can mean a lot of different things. I got my position through networking, but it was through a work with a student organization, and a lot of you, I'm sure, are part of those as well. So just put yourself out there. master's projects, class projects. I think a lot of people just think, oh, it's a class project. But if you actually take advantage of that and you put your skills to work and you practice those skills, that will just help you in the end. A lot of people are now putting their class projects on LinkedIn and on their resumes, right? Because employers see that and they're like, ooh, they did a good job with it. Maybe they published something out of it, right? So I think you should take advantage of every opportunity that comes your way. You see some small event, no matter how big or small, you go to it, you get interested, you talk to one person, right? That's networking, done. So you don't have to make a goal of, oh my God, I got to talk to like 10 people at this networking event, or it's not worth it, right? You just go, you talk to people, you find out something that you want to find out, and then you just keep going from there. So I think practicing these skills and putting them into action is definitely the best thing you can do.
I had a specific question for Chris. For those of you in the audience that may have design backgrounds, it seems to be a trend that there's a lot of interest in US-based companies looking for projects abroad to expand kind of the client type work. Can you talk a little bit about I don't know if you would have some perspectives on skill sets that you feel are really important for people working on internationally based projects?
Honestly, I think I can only speak for landscape architecture, obviously, but the skills that you need to know here are the same skills you need to know overseas. You need to know the basics. You need to know CAD. As much as you may hate it or love it, you gotta know it. You need to know your grading. Learn the metric system, for God's sake. It's amazing. I worked with two other Americans at my firm. One who had been the one who actually recruited me, and then another one who came in after me. He had 15 years experience in landscape architecture and did not know the metric system. So that when we would say, okay, we're going to put a 2-meter berm in here, he'd go, 2 meters, it's about 3 feet? No, it's more like 6 feet. It's like 2 yards. Oh, well, what's a centimeter? Yeah, anyhow, it's things that I think are common sense, but a lot of Americans, for whatever reason, we don't do that. Again, you're going to hear it again and again. Communication is key. Make sure you listen well to what everybody is saying to you, and that you are being very clear about what you're saying to them. The nice part about the design field is that communication involves a lot of pictures. Make sure that your designs are very clear in your intention, that you're getting across what you want to communicate. I think quite frankly, for most LAs coming out, the chances of you getting thrown right into a major international project, let's say in China, because that's one that seems to have, there's a lot of those types of projects going on now. You're probably not going to be involved in the initial design part. You're going to be doing a lot of the CAD details and things like that, and learning the ropes that way. So just kind of be prepared for that. But I would say that same notion holds for any project in the U.S. too. So I guess, long story short, I don't think there is that much of a difference between what you would do as a new employee coming out of school in the U.S. versus working on an international project.
I have a number of more questions here on my list that I'd like to go through, but I would really like to give an opportunity for all of you here to ask any questions that you may have. So please feel free if you have some specific questions for individual panelists or all of them as a group. Yes?
I have a question for Amy. What challenges do you come up against being in such a big organization trying to push a sustainability agenda, especially with emerging topics like, I know palm oil is a big deal right now and it's huge for cereals, and so I'm sure you've been following that trend and maybe trying to push.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
If you could repeat the question too.
Okay, so your question is, what are the challenges of sustainability with a huge company that I am, especially with kind of hot topic issues that are going on? So it's a big challenge. I think I told you. I think the biggest part is communication. you have to educate folks on sustainability. For us, if you're in height or SNRE, it's intuitive now, but it's still not across the board. So you think, oh, well, obviously a marketing person will understand the connection between sustainable agriculture and quality food, and they could use that, right? You have to explicitly say why those things get connected and how you can support them. I think a lot of the time I give a presentation to folks that are not explicitly in my field, which is the vast majority of people that I run into, and they learn about it. I'm like, that's really great. I'm happy to hear that my company's doing stuff like that. How can I help? Which is a wonderful question and also a very difficult one, because what specifically for their role can they do to help facilitate? Being able to give a clear, concise answer is very difficult when everything is such a big moving machine, right? So, you are a brand manager in Kashi doing this specific Go Lean Crunch. How can I help you make sustainability happen at Kellogg? Well, I don't know. You can know more about it. If I have a good idea for a project, I'll come to you and you'll take my meeting. But that's not really what they're looking for. They're looking for, okay, well, great, I got you on board. Here's a project and a plan. We're going to really go after palm oil, and we're going to go fully transparent supply chain. Costs a lot of money. You guys are going to pay for it. They can say no then. Obviously, they probably would, but they have something that they can really consider and chew on and move forward and say, okay, well, we can't do that, but we can do this, and give a very clear outcome. So that, I would say that's the biggest challenge, is how do you parcel up a very global supply chain, a very global company, and say, here are actionable items.
Any other questions? I have one I was going to jump in on. I think students, I work in career services at SNRE, and I know that a lot of students are really interested to hear, like, what does a typical week on the job look like? So for those of you at Brieland, what did your internship look like? What kinds of activities were you doing? Like, take a typical week. What kinds of things were you doing? What kinds of skills were you drawing on? And then for the other two, what kinds of things were you doing? Very diverse careers here. Just interested to have you highlight some of those for students.
So I think since I have the mic, right? So I have a very diverse job. So my weeks vary pretty considerably. Things come and go in waves. For the most part, I make a lot of PowerPoints. That is my skill that I bring to Kellogg that is universally accepted as a good thing. So no matter what I'm doing, I have to work with stakeholders to, within my company or externally, to drive the change, because I don't have ownership over anything, right? Because I'm doing it through different groups, whether it's employee engagement, I have to work with the plants to drive that. It's not my project. So if I'm doing that, then I'm on calls with the EHS, the Environmental Health and Safety Manager at the plant, or with the plant manager, the guy that's in charge of the plant, explaining why this matters and how and what the pros and cons are, right? So pros is that it's better for the environment, potentially could save money, there's all those things. Cons, it's going to take time to do that, put up posters, but here's all the toolkits I've done to support you. So that's the communication piece that I do a lot. I travel mostly domestically, over a third of my time for conferences and meetings and things. So I'm often in industry groups or multi-stakeholder kind of plenaries and consortiums. So I work a lot with NGOs and other companies that have similar questions and similar problems. So I have a lot of meetings and different engagement opportunities there. So that's It's normally what I'm doing, and writing things.
So are there, and writing, okay. Are there skills, for students in the audience, what are the things that you learned while in school that were super helpful to prepare you for this job? And then what advice do you have for students in terms of like, if you could do it over, what are some things that you're looking back on and saying, hey, you know, you really should take these types of courses or volunteer or do student leadership roles, et cetera?
So, like Brieland said, the interdisciplinary nature of SNRE and PITE and a lot of the dual degree students, no matter what fields you are, very important. Being able to translate what you do into other languages. And when I say other languages, I don't just mean literally, but also into engineering, into marketing, who speak a completely different language, let me tell you. Being able to facilitate those interactions to make it make sense for them, because you're selling them on the idea, not selling yourself on it. You already are in. So that's a big part of the good thing that we got from SNRE is that side. The other thing is being able to knock out one-pagers because you've written 30-page papers in your classes. It's a good thing. Being able to write, it's a skill that not everyone has. So being able to communicate effectively through simple, straightforward summaries of what you're looking for, what you're hoping to get, of progress that you've seen, being able to say, use science-based metrics and how you're doing it, saying that I'm not making it up, I have a reason for going after these specific things. All of those things are things you've learned in your classes that will reinforce credibility at your job.
I was speaking a lot about the curriculum side of things, which happened here at Michigan, which is not the most exciting part, so I'll head into more the implementation phase of the project, which is basically development work, what you can expect to get out of development work. And so I think our project, our daily projects that we had, basically we'd wake up, you have 1,000 people wanting to meet with you. We're at a university. People wanted to meet with us to talk about what's going to happen at the project, how the program is going to run, how everything is going to happen. We had to take care of the students as well, so we had to manage that. I think the biggest thing I'm getting at here is time management. So you have to really know how to manage your time well if you're going to be successful in development work, especially. There's always things that come up. There's always problems. You're never going to have a day where there's nothing wrong that happens. And so being able to work on your feet and problem solve is definitely an essential skill that you're going to have to be in development work. I think the best thing that comes out of it is in order to overcome those challenges, I think you have to set goals for yourself, but also be flexible. I know it's kind of counterintuitive, but you set a goal, and it may or may not work out the way you wanted it to, but that just gives you extra pride and extra feeling of accomplishment when you actually do figure out how to do it. And so I'll emphasize team again. When you have a good team working with you, it makes things so much better. And so sometimes in projects you're kind of just lumped with the team together, and so you have no control over that sometimes, you think, but I think if everyone sets out their priorities from the get-go and everyone makes an effort to do that, I think it'll go along a lot smoother. The best part, I think, was building kind of these global networks in development. So one project that I'm very proud of that we worked on during this camp was to basically put ideas out there during meetings with these big head honchos at USAID and RTI. So usually in those kinds of meetings, a lot of people might just sit back and just kind of be in the background. We had one really good idea that we kind of learned from SNRE and all the things that Lisa and Michelle have done, is putting on a career fair for these students at the camp. And so luckily the person in charge of the camp, or the head person at USAID, loved the idea and pitched it to USAID. They pitched it to Firestone, who has a big plantation there. We had actually big head honchos from these companies coming to meet with the students and meet with us during this camp. And so I think putting yourself out there and knowing that your ideas are good. You're all here for a reason. You're all in Michigan for a reason. And so knowing your ideas are good and just putting yourself out there and just making those global networks really will pay off. And again, getting these skills from any environment that you're in at Michigan. So classes, projects, group student organizations, intramurals. You'll be surprised how many connections you can make not expecting to make any connections. So you can be walking down the street, run into somebody, and they're going to be somebody that can help you in the future or that you can work with in the future. So be open, I think, is also a good one. Just do what you love to do, and things will come, I think, as they will. So.
I won't bore you too much with the mundane details of a typical week. I mean, again, expect to do a lot of CAD work. You're going to be sitting there doing some drawings. It's a lot of meetings, though, and I'm going to echo what both the other panelists have been saying. Be prepared to work in an interdisciplinary setting. For me, I think I probably put in about 5 hours a week in meetings with engineers, architects, planners, and so on. So that's always good. Be prepared. This is going to sound a little bit odd, but if you like coffee, it's a good thing, because sitting around the coffee machine in the morning, at least in Norway, that's a very common thing. Just talking about projects and how things are going with the various other people from other departments is a huge deal. I had one case where they had a stream daylighting project that came up, and the only reason I found out about it was because I happened to be talking to one of the water engineers, and he said, "Hey, you know about this stuff, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, let's talk about it a little bit more." Unfortunately, the project didn't happen, but it was something that got the ball rolling and people talking about it. Yeah, it's, again, really, this what we've already talked about. Be able to communicate, be able to do the mundane tasks. And the only other thing I would add is don't be a perfectionist. It's a bad habit. You need to learn how to work quickly and efficiently, which is something I struggle with every day, because, as Brieland just said, there are always going to be problems. You're always going to be dissatisfied with what you do, but at least to a certain extent. Get over it. You'll be okay. Everybody else will be happy with what it is. You guys know a lot more than you realize, and yeah, you'll be doing just fine.
So you can hang on to the mic, Chris. I wanted to ask, I think this question would apply more to Chris and Brieland for those working abroad. I know you had tremendous advice, and Chris and I talked a lot as he was going to be moving to Norway, and he had some really tremendous advice on the practical aspects for students who are considering working abroad. There's a lot that goes into it, as I know you can all imagine, but I'd like to ask Chris and then maybe Brieland, who did his internship abroad. What are some of those logistical considerations that you would give advice to students who are considering this? What do you have?
Some of this is, I think, common sense. When you're going to work for a new company, I think in the U.S. a lot of times we base things on just a trust level that you can't really have with somebody overseas. If somebody says, "We're going to offer you this perk when you get here," that's great, but make sure you get that in your contract when you go out. Because I can tell you with first-hand experience, it doesn't always come through. You know, somebody may promise you something, but then HR doesn't know about that, and then HR finds out and says, "Well, we can't promise that," and by then it's too late. Make sure that the company you're working for has somebody that can help you out with the visa process. It is, depending on the country you go to, it can be extremely frustrating. As an example, when I got to Norway, I had to get what's called, basically like a social security number for Norway. But you can't get the social security number until you have a permanent address. But you can't get a permanent address unless you've got a social security number. And the company that I was with had told me originally, "Oh, we'll put you up somewhere and you'll be fine for the first couple of months." Well, as it turned out, the company I was with put me up for 2 weeks and then said, "You're on your own." Fortunately, I got lucky. I had a few friends at the office by then, and they pointed me in the right direction, and I found somebody who wasn't one of the corporate apartment houses, and I was able to get the place right away. But if I had to do that on my own without knowing anybody there, it would have been just absolutely miserable. As it was frustrating, but we got through it. Trying to think of some of the other. The visa is the big one. It's not as easy as you think. It's one thing to go travel somewhere and visit for a little while, but when you're going to go work somewhere, there are again a lot of regulations that you're not aware of. Find out how long your visa is going to be good for. What's the renewal process for that? What are the costs for that? Moving overseas can be really expensive. And you need to also think about what are the usually there's more standards than laws, but what are the regulations for if you decide you don't like this position? In the U.S., if you don't like something, hey, thanks, but it's not working out, and you quit, and you can go start somewhere else the next day, technically. And Norway and a lot of countries in Europe, it's a 3-month process. On the positive side, if somebody decides to let you go, they have to give you 3 months notice. On the negative side, if you decide you want to go, you've got to give 3 months notice. And that 3 months can crawl if you're in a situation you don't like. So just really do your homework ahead of time before you go out, before you sign that contract and commit yourself. I guess the last thing I would say about it is, depending on where you go, you're going to get a job offer and you're going to look at this number and you can convert it to dollars and go, wow, I'm going to make a ton of money. That's exactly what I did. I got an offer and I said, this is insane. I wouldn't make this working if I've been working 15 years in this field. Then I got to Norway and found out that this number, which was about 3 times what I expected to make here, barely covered cost of living there because it was 4 times as expensive to live in Norway as it is to live here. Really make sure you understand the financial system that you're getting into and you understand what your monthly bills are going to be. Think about entertainment because it's all well and good to work all day long, but you've got to get away from it every now and then. Think about if you want to travel. Think about if you want to come home. We ended up coming home once or twice a year, and it cost a lot of money to go from front of there. So there's just a lot of expenses and things like that that you should be prepared for before you go overseas anywhere. I can talk more about this with you for like hours if you want. So I'll pass this over to Brieland for now.
Thanks. Yeah, I would definitely say everything you just said. So that was good. And I guess I can speak to both. A little bit to both. So after I graduated from college, I actually took 2 years off and just traveled abroad and worked abroad. So I went to Australia to work and then went to New Zealand and Southeast Asia and everything like that. And so before I went, a big thing that I did was to obviously research the places that I'm going. So I worked in Australia, knew that you make so much more money there, but it is about 3 times as expensive to live there. So that's a good thing going in there is just to do your homework, not necessarily just on the financial aspects, but just kind of reflect internally, is this what you want to do? There are a lot of jobs in the States now where you can travel abroad and work abroad and take trips like that. Is that something that you would be more interested in rather than actually living abroad, right? So there are a lot of different options that you can take, and I would definitely encourage you to think about that wholeheartedly before you make the decision. But everything that Chris said was right on key. I think for development work is especially difficult. A lot of times because you're placed into situations that really get you out of your comfort zone, and you have to be prepared for that. I remember the first time I went to Liberia. I basically locked myself in a room for 2 days and wanted to go home and cry and everything like that. But after you get over that, it's awesome. And so once you feel like you want to die, it's really cool. And but yeah, I think there's 2 different sides of the coin. One, you're living abroad in another developed country that's got all the amenities that you're kind of used to here, but another side of the coin is you're going to a developing country that's so far removed from what you're used to. And that is a big deal. I think, Bill, I'm sure there's plenty of resources at the International Center and International Institute that will help you in making that decision, if that's what you want to do. There are plenty of former Peace Corps volunteers here at SNRE, and I'm sure around campus that will help you. I'd be more than happy to talk with any of you that are interested. I know we worked with a couple of Peace Corps over this program, and Peace Corps are some of the most amazing people that I've ever met. So, and they're just awesome. So I would say reach out to them if you're interested. And it's a big move to move away from home, but home is where you make it. So if you're really interested in doing that, I think that it's a pretty good choice. So.
Okay, we have 2 or 3 more minutes for other questions from the audience before we go and move into the more informal session where all of you guys can come and chat with the panelists up front. Any other questions from folks? Go ahead.
This is for Amy. With a big kind of global company like Kellogg, how did you get your foot in the door?
I applied. Actually, in general, I would say, as we talked about, network. That got me networking with other SNRE folks, got me into USDA. Without USDA, I wouldn't have gotten Kellogg. I just applied to Kellogg though. Didn't know anybody, got really lucky that what they were looking for matched up so well with my resume. And then the other big thing is that if you can show a passion for why you want to be there, not just there in the job, but there physically, that helps. So Kellogg is in Michigan. I was in DC, my family lives in Michigan, so part of my pitch to them was that I wanted to move home closer to my mom. And so, as she's retired, one of the issues I would say with Kellogg is that it's in Battle Creek, Michigan, and it's not very glamorous. You should go there, it's beautiful. So saying that this is more than just, this is a good opportunity for my career, but saying, this feels like home to me, it could be a good home for me, I think that helped tip the scales a little bit.
This is for Chris. So similarly, when in an application process, so yours was more like a connection with an alum, but if you're going to apply abroad, that's the only access to the company is through an application and not through meeting in person. So how do you, in your application, kind of put yourself as someone from the U.S. who's not currently in the country that you're applying to?
Okay, so the question is how do you apply when you don't necessarily have a contact there and you're coming from the U.S. and you want to work abroad? I think you need to demonstrate. There were several people that came into Norway, and again, I'll speak about Norway because I know that, they went and they stayed on a short-term visit visa, so you can stay like 90 days. That's one way to get yourself started. You're there already, but you're demonstrating that you want to be in that country. You can certainly apply with an international company from here. And I'll be honest with you though, I think that a lot of them will look at the hassles involved and be just, hey, I can get somebody locally, it's not a problem. That being said, a country like Norway, which is just absolutely booming and has more work than they know what to do with, they are looking overseas constantly. A country like Germany, where they're pretty set and everybody's happy and they want to stay there, you might have a hard time breaking in. So I think if you can find a way to get there first and apply from there, that might be the best way to do it. But the other thing I would recommend is honestly look at U.S. companies that work internationally, because I think that's your best bet. Whether it be AECOM or something like that. There's a ton of huge firms that are doing work all over the globe, and then you've got the advantage of you can start from here, get your training that you need, and then move overseas. And when you do the interview, say, look, I'm really interested in working overseas somewhere, just so they know. And chances are they'll be able to accommodate you.
Great, well I think we're out of time. I would like to thank the panelists for spending time, and then you guys can come down and